Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Digital Food 2021. Today's topic is metrics and standards. So I'm Tiffany Tsui. I'm the organizer and co-organizer and the moderator of Digital Food 2021 series. I'm Chinese, I'm Dutch. I'm joining from the Netherlands right now. I'm a global strategist focusing on the areas of development, sustainability, and transformation. Together with Dick Veerman, founder of Foodlog, we developed the concept of this digital food to focus on the theme of to connect data, technology, and strategy, and connect people, business, and regions. First of all, I would like to thank you for the sponsors. I mentioned them here: ktba, InfoSupport, SyncForce, City of Rotterdam, Province Zuid-Holland, Greenport West-Holland, Leiden, Delft, Erasmus University, and Wageningen University. So to introduce our topic today, I would like to start with a poll question. Bianca, please. So the first question is, what do you think about the international trend of animal protein consumption will be? Are you answering that? I would like to introduce our speaker today. You already guessed from the poll question that our topic today will be focusing on animal protein. So Anke Hamminga, she is the sustainability EU lead for Cargill. Anke describes herself as a proud farmer's daughter. You love nature, you love horse riding, and you're passing on the love onto your two daughters. You are an experienced sustainability and commercial director with a passion for sustainability. With a long history of working in the agriculture industry, you focus on animal feed and dairy and international sustainable agriculture. So let's see what our audience today think about the topic of animal protein consumption in the world. Okay. Do you agree, Anke, with this result that while the Western consumers have, let's say, increasing war on meat, let's say, the global trend is likely still increase? Do you agree with this sentiment?
Yes, I do. And it's not per se up to me personally to agree or disagree. I think it's something that we see happening and where we see also a lot of evidence for in the numbers that the animal protein request is still growing.
Yes. So to talk about animal protein, we need to start actually with feed. So before you start introducing our first part, to give a background of what the topic of today is about and why is Cargill involved in this, let's test also our audience knowledge about the global wheat market. Bianca, please. So 2 questions. Who is the biggest, who imported most and who exported most? Do you know? Oh, cannot submit yet. Oh yeah, 2 questions. So we'll show the result later and after your first part. So please take over and tell us about the wheat, the world of feed, of grains.
So let me give it a try. First of all, thank you very much for having me here, for the invitation. And I will try to share my screen. Hope that it all works. So first of all, again, thank you for the invitation, for the way that you also online try to not only connect data and technology, but more important, connect people. And it gives me the opportunity to talk a little bit about, in a humble way, about how we are trying to be the leader in nourishing the world in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way. And of course, that's a very nice purpose written down, but it's much more important what it actually means. And I will try to give you a little bit of a flavor of how we are how we're trying to get there in the best way possible. Specifically, zooming in on how we do that as animal nutrition business within Cargill. If we look at nourishing the world in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way, there are a lot of topics that come to mind, and we try to capture them in the goals that you can see here. And as you can see, it's very broad because it does touch upon a lot of different topics where we can play a role as Cargill in the whole food chain, so to say. And as we are talking about sustainability, it seems like we are creating a new language. And with the Sustainable Development Goals in mind, they've done a great job in creating this new language that actually connects not only companies, but also governments, also NGOs. So if you look at the bar underneath, we really feel strongly connected to the SDGs as you can see them there. And today we will talk a little bit more about, for example, the climate change and the land use that will come into play when we are talking about metrics. And for all these goals, we do have metrics in place. And that in itself is already quite an accomplishment. And not because it is hard to write metrics down, but it is so important to be able to also track and trace how we are doing and how we get to the goals that we set. So looking at the climate change, for example, we have said that we want to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in our operations by 10% by 2025 versus 2017. And we want to reduce 30% in our supply chain per ton of products sold by 2030 versus 2017. And how we will do that, I will try to tell you a little bit more about that. So if we look at Cargill Animal Nutrition, then we can say that we truly sit at the heart of the supply chain. And we also see it, therefore, as an opportunity to drive a deeper level of sustainability understanding and support our customers to become a leader in sustainable supply chains. So what it means is that what we are trying to do is to make sure that we get the right measurements in place, that we have the right methodology, that we create insights in how certain choices, for example, in raw materials, will lead to certain consequences. And I will come with an example of that later. And typically as animal nutrition, we sit between the crop producers and the animal farm, so to say. We sit totally in the middle, and we're trying to translate the needs from both sides. So how does that then look like? What we are trying to do is to try to raise what's possible for you. And that is talking about connecting the success on the farm, on the one hand, and the success in the value chain on the other hand. What's really important when we're looking at the farm performance, then we see that the performance of the animals, especially in the more developed countries, are at a very high level already. Well-being is something that came into play a couple of years ago, and it's becoming very well known as well. Sustainability is another building block that's being added. And what we are trying to do is to connect the dots on sustainability, performance, and well-being to excellence, to power your performance, and to grow the operations. And growing always gives a little bit of a negative sense, because in our world, in the Western world, we're thinking mostly of very big farms, very intensive husbandry. But what we mean is you can grow in different areas. You can grow in improving well-being of the animals. You can grow in decreasing the environmental impact. And that is how we see grow a bit broader than just growing in animal numbers. If we look at what's then important on farm, then we look at three different aspects. We're looking at the core nutrition solutions, something that we build upon our expertise and knowledge for years already. And that's very simply said, it's a way to get the most out of the feed that the animals consume. If we're looking at emissions, we all know that with all processes, also with animal husbandry, there are losses. So what's important is that we try to reduce the emissions as much as possible. And that can be to meet regulatory requirements, but it can also be to meet requirements from retail concepts, for example. Animal well-being, as I just told you already, it's a topic that has been raised over the past couple of years and gained a lot of attention, and is a very well-deserved topic, because there were improvements possible and a lot of improvements were made over the past years. If we then look at the success in the value chain, it's really trying to get innovative sustainability solutions that are also expected and also respected by the customers. As you know, we're talking a lot about new sustainable ingredients to help produce animal protein in a very responsible way. Reducing the climate impact, you see the cows here, is one of the examples where we can play a big role in reducing emissions. And last but not least, antibiotic stewardship is one of the key topics that is on our agenda, and also already has been on our agenda, to make sure that we safeguard animal and human health. And it's not coincidental that if we look at the European Green Deal, and more specifically the Farm to Fork strategy, that all of these topics are actually covered in the Farm to Fork strategy. So the question in the end is, if we raise what's possible for you, where do we then want to get to tomorrow? And I would like to start at the end, and that's starting with the consumers, because we do see that we need to play a role in enable consumer-facing storytelling and also supporting claims, and make sure that we help translating consumer sustainability perspectives for our customers. And in the middle, of course, we do see the food service, retail, and manufacturers. And since there is a bigger understanding and a better understanding of where the impact is coming from when it comes to animal protein, it also drives a lot of focus towards the feed, which does make sense. And therefore, it's also necessary to help enhance the understanding around the role of feed in sustainability. As you all know, we are talking about innovative new protein sources. And with that, it's also very important to not only encourage the demand for protein with sustainability advantages, but also understand the consequences and the impact of it. So in that way, we are trying to connect the dots on sustainable protein and customer sustainability goals. For the producers, it's still very important to be able to rely on nutritional excellence. As I just mentioned, what you want to provide the best nutrients for the animals. Make sure that they are performing the way you want them to perform and maintain their very good high level of animal well-being. However, if there are solutions or if there are challenges on farm, we also need to make sure that we still have solutions. So even though our goal and our aim will be to reduce antibiotic use, for example, we have to make sure that if a farmer is facing certain challenges, that there are still solutions to be able to help their animals. And last but not least, how to differentiate with customers. We see all kind of very nice concepts popping up from more sustainable approaches, organic, as we all know, non-GM. It is not up to us as Cargill to decide what's best. Where we want to play a role is that informed decisions are being made and that it's well understood what the consequences are of the choices that are being made. So in the end, we all do it for the consumers, and we are also doing performing our own survey on the consumers, and this is one of the outcomes, which is, I think, a very cool picture. Because the surveyed customers, they say that animal protein can be healthy for humans and sustainable for the planet. And as you can see, 93% believes that it can be part of a healthy diet, and already 80% believes that it can be part of an environmentally responsible diet. And that is also where we have a gap to bridge to bring the 80 to the 93. to show that it's not only healthy, but it's also very sustainable. And the very positive message is that already 80% believe that we're doing a really good job, which is a great accomplishment so far. However, we can do better. So the title is Why Start Working with LCA. The topic of this digital food is talking about metrics. And if we want to show that we are doing things in a more sustainable way, then there's the question, how can you then determine how you do that? And lifecycle analysis is a way and a methodology where you can capture a big part of the environmental impact. And we see that that is a topic that's popping up more and more, and something that we are working on as well. And if you then look at what is driving our own customers, then you see two groups. One is the market-driven group who really want to be one of the front runners or investigate and explore new methodologies and opportunities, or want to comply with retail concepts. And on the other hand, we do see the regulatory-driven one, and that's mainly coming back to the European Green Deal. And what a very important part of the European Green Deal is a sustainable food labeling framework that is set to integrate nutritional, climate, environmental, and social aspects. Now, some key takeaways, and that's where I will stop my introduction, is if we look at what is driving from the European Green Deal and what we expect as impact on our business, those are all topics that I just mentioned that we have been working on in the past already and that are on our innovation agenda as well. And that is the reduction in nitrogen and phosphorus losses. It's the reduction in antimicrobials. There's the goal for more organic farming, of 25% of agricultural land under organic farming, feed additive revision regulation, sustainable food labeling, as I just mentioned, and also the evaluation and revision of the existing animal welfare legislation. So, Tiffany, I would like to leave my introduction.
Thank you, Anke. Yes, thank you for the part one introduction. I would like to ask Bianca to show the PDF, which shows also the result of our first poll question. Biggest importer. A lot of people think Netherlands is the biggest importer. Exporter, Australia. Yes. So, Anke, you understand you are in charge of EU, so for sustainability. And but on this map, of course, you can see in this global wheat map, it's immensely connected. So this topic is hugely global. So when you talk about consumers in Europe, but also consumers everywhere in the world, actually will be impacted by developments on food labeling, sustainability matrices and data available, right? So that is also for a kind of question to say, well, who are these customers and consumers you are thinking of? Bianca, maybe can you show the next sheet just to show the result? So you can see here, indeed, the major export countries in the world are US, Australia. Actually, Australia has been increasing significantly. This is data from 5 years ago. And the next one is import, please. Yeah. So the import picture is basically everyone in the world are major importers. And Netherlands here is quite a big one, but the biggest Egypt, South Africa. So actually, that's why we have our Africa focus on digital food, because for African nations and developing nations, this wheat import dependency on food is also a big topic. But countries like China or developing countries are increasing in wheat import, not for human consumption, but indeed for animal protein increase. So let's go for before we go for our next part two, let's show this next poll question, because we'll talk about chicken. Bianca, can you show the poll question? So we asked you about the wheat. Who is the biggest importer, exporter? So now the question is chicken. We'll talk about who is the biggest now producer and increasing in importing in demand. So while you're answering that, we'll show the result later after Anke's question. So this, I was also would like to ask Anke to explain to us this development on this LCA development and how it's going to be helping consumers, business, and the regulatory bodies to understand with their business decisions and consumption decisions.
Let me at least give it a try. So if we look at the choices that we made, referring back to the metrics that are needed to look at improvement opportunities, but also determine what is our current impact, then we base that upon the experience that we already have around joining the PEFCR. And for the ones of you who are familiar with the European approach, you might have heard about the PEF approach. And that is really around product environmental footprint category rules that are defined by the European Committee, and who asked, I think already back in 2014, different businesses to try to apply these rules in order to be able to compare all kinds of products, so compare apples to apples, so to say. So we did that with our European Feed Association, the FIFAC, and we produced this PEFCR feed for food-producing animals, which has been based upon the LEAP guidelines, the PEFCR category rules, the recipe 2016. And based upon that, we also choose to work with CIMAPRO. And CIMAPRO is just one of the calculation tools where you can do your calculations on the environmental impact. What's important for us that it links to the pre-competitive approach from the PEF and also from the FAO. What we've also seen is that within this European project, we had to come up with data. We had to come up with data on raw materials. And the European Committee actually bought those databases that count for all the businesses. And in one of these meetings, when there was, before there was COVID, when we were having our meeting in Brussels, we said, actually, how nice would it be that not only we within Europe benefit from this type of information, but how could we let the whole world benefit from the work that we are doing here and make sure that if people on the other side of the world want to start doing some calculations to do some hotspot analysis, to try to have a better understanding how the raw material crop growth is impacting the environmental impact of feed. And that's where the idea was born to start the GFLI. And the GFLI actually stands for Global Metrics for Sustainable Feed, which I will try to explain in the next slide. Because with this Global Feed LCA Institute, we make sure that we create a new language. And as Tiffany already mentioned in the beginning, also this platform is meant to connect the dots, to connect the people. What we wanted to do is to connect globally the feed world when it comes to environmental impact of raw materials. And the nice thing about it is that we are all looking in this very chaotic world today when it comes to sustainability, where we are all searching how we can do that in the best way possible. We are looking for some benchmarks. We are looking for guidelines. And the nice thing is that with this PEF approach, based upon the FAO LEAP guidelines, we have some very strong, fundamental pre-competitive baseline where we can refer to. And with the Institute, we are providing public access to the GFLI database. And there's also possibility to get more data in, because as you can imagine, we are still starting, and it's still a very young initiative. there are also still some gaps in the data. And with the global partners that we have now, and with making this from a global initiative, we also get the correct information from the different regions all over the world. So what we would really like to facilitate as GFLI is to have access on the data for the raw materials, for animal nutrition, and for the food industry, to get a really harmonized methodology. So that is the aim, and it's something that we support strongly. How does it then look like? Well, this is just a screenshot, and it's way too small, of course, but just to explain a little bit about the layout. You see here in the top the different environmental impact factors, and as you can see here on the left, you see all different product names, different soybeans, in this case at the farm, and you can see the source. So there are different sources, GFLI EU, but also information from the US, information from Canada, and so you can also track and trace where the information is coming from. And this already gives a very good insight on the impact of the different raw materials. And as I mentioned in the beginning in the introduction, from the food and retail point of view, there's more and more understanding of where the environmental impact of animal products are coming from. And as you can see in this graph here, which is actually being made by the wood, you can see that the crops and on the farm, that's where the biggest impact is. So the impact of the choice of raw materials for the feed does have a big impact. And as you can see, the steps in between, they're really variable for the transporting part and for the farm part. And that's also where a good analysis really comes into play. Also, when we're talking about how regional or how local should we make our whole food value chain, and where is the real impact coming from? Because there's a difference between the emotional aspects and something that we can refer to, like a long transport distance, and the actual impact that it has. So for us, what we see as a very big challenge is how to connect the environmental impact to our current nutritional approach, where we have a lot of knowledge and experience already. And not gonna bother you with all the environmental impact factors, but what I do like to point out is that it all comes back to the impact of protein, nitrogen, phosphorus, and carbon. And the big question is, how do we merge these worlds? And how can we make sure that we will not put all kinds of limitations on, here, for example, carbon footprint per kilogram of feed, because it's much more important to understand what the impact of that feed will be on the farm performance. So what we have to make sure is that we prevent all kind of rules, legislation that might seem to help reducing the environmental impact of feed, but in the end will not help on improving the environmental impact on farm. And that's where also data and the right methodologies are necessary for. So we are looking for combining environmental impact, feed formulation impact, and animal performance and well-being impact, because that's the key. And what we see today and what we have seen, and that's also where I think Dick will come back to, is that there's got to be a balance. There's got to be a balance between environmental impact, price, and animal performance, health, and well-being. And it's really important to keep in mind what is your prioritization. And that is something that will determine your outcome. And that it seems like an open door. However, it is so true that if you choose as your optimization your environmental impact as first, and you want to maintain your animal performance, then most likely you will not get the least cost. And what we are really aiming for is to have then that balanced approach and discussion. Because if we're looking at this example, and then that's also where I will stop, but if you look at this example from slow grow birds versus conventional birds, then you can see that the prioritization seems to be on the welfare part, where slow grow birds actually do use more feed, have a little bit lower feed conversion ratio, will have a higher carbon footprint per chicken and also higher carbon footprint per kilogram of live weight. And again, I really want to stress, we do not see it up to us as Cargill Animal Nutrition to make it as a judgment call. What we want to do is make sure that informed decisions are being made. So if you have good reasons to choose for this approach, so choose for, in this case example, a slow grow bird, then it's also good to know what the consequences are. And that choosing for the one means that you have some offset impact on other areas as well. Tiffany, I would like to leave it for now.
Okay, so would you come back still for the actual comparison or not? Maybe later with the case. Okay, great. So, well, Bianca, can you show us the sheet of the chicken global map? Get back to the whole question earlier. Next one. So we asked you about the wheat, and now it's the chicken. This is the global trade network. Again, it's extremely connected. Let's see the importer and exporter sheet also. So you can see Netherlands was one of the actually top exporter, but this status has been taken over by Brazil recent years. And import, let's see who's importing. You can see the growth. For example, Hong Kong, where I grew up, my home, it's one of the biggest importer, and China, and Europe, everyone actually. So demand for white meat protein is increasing globally everywhere. But Anke, on this picture, I'd like to ask you from a point of view, just me as a consumer, let's say in Hong Kong, in Netherlands, when a Dutch chicken farm imports wheat from Australia, for example, not from EU, produce chicken and then export to Hong Kong. In this LCA tool, which part of the life cycle do you cover? Do you cover the entire chain all the way to the retail in Hong Kong, or do you only cover, let's say, the production part in the Netherlands?
So the example that I just discussed, the GFLI database, that is a database that covers the impact of the raw materials. So where the crops are being grown to where it's being imported up until to delivery on farm. So it does not include farm performance. And there are all the tools to do that as well. And that are in place. So that is an analysis that you can make, but the GFLI really covers the raw material impact.
So there's also a lot of work, I imagine, at the GFLI to harmonize the entire chain, because in order for the consumer at the end to understand, or for business to understand their chain in the global trade network, they would need a potentially couple tools to talk to each other. Do they talk to each other right now?
You can make them talk to each other. That's for sure.
But that's still a lot of work to be done, I imagine.
Absolutely.
Let's see what how our audience has did on this question, Bianca. The result. Oh. Actually, people got it mostly right. Yeah. So we have a good, well-informed participant today. Would you like to continue with the case on the comparison and the choices of the chicken?
Well, I just shared the comparison for the broilers, the slow grow birds versus the conventional birds. But there are many more examples that can be made. And in this case, what I would like to stress is if we look at one of the hot topics, because you got as an example wheat, of course, soy is one of the topics that's been discussed a lot, and also the questions that we receive: what if we would get soy out of the diet, and how would it then look like? There are several calculations being made, several trials being done. And then I just want to stress that it is possible, but it doesn't mean it does make it all better. And the comparison here is being made for broiler feed with and without soy. So on the left side, you do see the soy, on the right side, you see it without the soy. And this is one excluding the land use change. Because if you take the deforestation into account, then of course the left side could be higher. However, what we also see is that you can choose for sustainable soy without the land use change factor, or for US soy, for example, or for donut soy. So to make that comparison without the impact, you see that if we would go, just as an example, if we would go for broiler feed without soy, it doesn't mean that you will just improve your environmental impact. It will be different. And this is just to show that as an example. But for layers, it is much easier to change in the raw materials. And that's something you can compare with when you feed babies. They start on milk, then you have the toddlers. You learn them how to eat and prepare the digestive system. And then as adults, you can deal with a big variety, normally, of all kind of food ingredients. Tiffany, so far?
Yeah, great. I think we already also see a lot of questions coming through. Also, I'm quite interested in one of your sheets showing the transport impact actually is relatively low. Is that because it didn't cover the entire trade, or is it already indeed the transport issue is not the biggest impact?
Well, it's always hard to talk in very general terms like this. I do understand the question. It was to show that emotionally we refer to transport as a huge impact factor. However, if we look at the big ships that do the transportation overseas, so to say, the impact per kilogram of feed is very low, or per kilogram of raw material. Actually, you can better have it imported via such a big ship than getting grains from Ukraine all by truck. So my only point was that it's important to look at the real impact that we can determine and make decisions based upon that, and not only based upon emotional your emotional judgment, so to say.
It will be very interesting indeed to see some analysis comparing the issues, because from the map you see wheat actually is not the biggest producer in Europe. So the 25% organic for farming on the global feed industry has only a small percentage. So you need the producers and the chicken raisers with the big where the demand is growing to also work together, so that also the data will be
Absolutely. The interesting thing is that with the European Green Deal, a couple of goals are being mentioned, and the road how we get towards that goal, that's not clear yet. And it's also important to understand, at least it helps me always to understand, to get a bit of the background why certain targets are being mentioned. And the target of the 25% organic is really related to biodiversity and to improving biodiversity, and with the belief that if we as European Union setting certain targets on deforestation, for example, then we also have to play our own part in it as well. And it will be very interesting to see how we will get to maybe the 25% organic in 2030, and what the spin-off will be also towards the livestock sector, which is not clear today.
behind me, you see also we have coming talks all a lot focusing on this environmental standards and EU Green Deal. Indeed, it's a very important topic, and EU can set example for other parts of the world. But it's also very complex regarding to LCA, what is the right metrics, if the right data is available, do they talk to each other, do they all adopt the same standards? So that's a immensely important and challenging work you are doing. So then we have the next part on Dick. Would like to open up the discussion further to a broader topic. And before Dick starts, we would like to ask or continue discussion on our just mentioned on data platforms. Maybe it's a poll question of what do our audience think about the future of how do you interconnect different data platforms. Bianca? So this question is actually we discussed this topic during our previous talk with regarding egg chain. So of the related chicken, it's the global egg chain about indeed how would be what would be the most likely landscape for interconnecting separate data platforms in the food industry. So we can come back later. Dick, I'd like to invite you to open up the discussion part with a introduction, and also to introduce Dick is founder of Foodlog, which is a online media platform focused on the intersection of food and politics for many years. Dick.
Yes, thank you, Tiffany. I'll share my screen explaining what natural capital is and what the war on methodologies and actually the taxonomy of metrics is. So I'll just explain in my very short introduction, it should take only 5 minutes, what is natural capital and how to decide on the metrics. Well, the basic notion of natural capital is that we are nature. We as human beings are nature. Our economy is part of nature. And that is exactly what it is about, but it is a system without interest, so to speak. So you cannot lend out money as banks do. They lend out money, then you create something new. That something new gains value, and all of a sudden there is more reality. But nature doesn't work that way. So natural capital, that is how I try to define it, is about the economy as part of nature. And that means that it delivers ecosystem services while behaving as our species does. And that means that you cannot just create something new out of the blue. It'll have to comply with the system as a whole. The example I give here continues on the last topic, the carbon cycle. Carbon is being produced by human beings as a species, as a part of nature, but emitting carbon taken from the soil, and it adds CO2 to the atmosphere. And that atmosphere is having now in it too many parts per million, about over 400. And those parts, that number of parts, changes climate and changes, in fact, the conditions for us to live on Earth. So as a part of this ecosystem of the world, we'll have to capture it and to store it and to put it back. And that is something you need to do immediately, really immediately. Otherwise, you'll get stuck. The natural capital approach doesn't accept just monetizing externalized costs. And yet that is what we're talking about. We're talking about we need to adopt true costing. But we needn't just accept true costing. We need to pay our debt to nature back immediately. And our debt to nature shouldn't even build up. We should immediately balance it. And that is what a wonderful graph from the World Resources Institute, which I found by Marianne Smit, by the way, and I know she's watching, in a Microsoft report. You'll see there on the low-hand side negative emissions. Negative emissions are emissions we need to take out of the air, out of the atmosphere. So we need to pay for something and we don't get anything in return, and that is because we didn't balance it from the start. That is what natural capital is about, paying back immediately, as there is no lender in last resort. You need to balance things you get, you just throw out of balance. You need to balance them right away. So you need to pay back directly in terms of ecosystems services. In a way, it's Islamic banking. There is no interest in Islamic banking. You need to put your capital to work in the system immediately. Now, there are different shades of gray and there are different shades of green as well in natural capital. And that is, I just put Cargill at the center. How do you behave between various value systems in being green? How to behave as a global company? I find it very, I get enthusiastic by the initiative of the GFLI. Because what it does is making one universal taxonomy of numbers. What does a number stand for? So you define categories, you define numbers, and you get a system. The world right now is rather more driven by something on the left-hand side of this matrix. We believe in things, we believe in all kinds of frames. Think of, we need to go local, we need to do agroecological farming, or we need to be highly productive and we need to spare land in all kinds of ways. That is all kind of frame-based, and it could even be exclusive. That means you can do green protectionism with it, protecting your own economy and throwing out this global trade, as Anke actually is showing a little bit. Global trade can be very green, even more green than so-called green approaches like agroecology. So that is something to be very careful about. And then you get this critical globalism and critical regionalism on the other hand. It's fact-based. That is more based on the facts. A system like the GFLA tries to get on its feet. And you can still be a regionalist if you think that the world is divided in geopolitical blocks and you should rather optimize in your part of the world, your system. And if you believe, as some people do, in inclusiveness, so actually trying to share nature on a global basis, you get something on the left-hand side that is something I'd call critical globalism. And I think Cargill's Anke just explained that we can become critical globalists and be even more green than in ways of green protectionism on the right-hand side down, doing agroecology. So how to behave as a global company between all these belief systems and how to get to something that was once a good global project, trying to share nature with all of us present on this world. Now, there are the challenges. That is one challenge. Another challenge is the goodness paradox. The name is not invented by me, but by Hans de Gier, whom you saw in the first chat from SyncForce. You always have to accept that you can't be, that there is always a trade-off. You can't be perfect in all quadrants. Companies need to make profits, but you need to do natural accounting. You need to repay immediately what you're doing in terms of planetary services. We want to serve us, rich consumers, in terms of human health and human well-being. and we want to be animals well off, well-being in our husbandry systems, and we want to pay humane wages to people who work for us and who don't live in wealthy circumstances as people in Western countries and rich countries do. So you can't have your cake and eat it. And how to choose and decide who is entitled to decide on where the chips fall is a grossly underrated governance question. And that was the last poll question. Who should make these systems and who should decide on where the chips fall? That is something the United Nations could do or the FAO could do, but they don't do it. So where to do it? That is this grossly underrated governance question. And there is another grossly underrated governance question, that is the fight about methods. Who's decided? Who has the right to decide on the right approach to paybacks? What Anke was presenting is a way of making the taxonomy, the way of attributing values, numbers to those categories, but there will still be practitioners and expert intuitions that will tell you, well, this way of doing agriculture in that part of the world will actually give you a 30% higher yield, and that is why it is all different. And that is still a question in the taxonomy, and that is what I call the methods fight. And we'll have to decide on who is to decide, and if we don't agree, for we will not agree, is then perhaps not agreeing the way to create a participative kind of community to go about this. And that is where I'll exit my screen sharing and get back to you. So, opening up the discussion, the big question is, what is being achieved here? I think Cargill is big company. Some see it as a big multinational, actually just working for shareholders, as Roel Bosma is asking already in the questions. And yet they are laying something that could be said, that could be termed as something of a global democracy on deciding how to set standards. That is what I'd like to open the discussion with. Is this indeed the basis for a kind of global democracy on setting standards and deciding on what we really want, instead of this big, hairy systems talk like agroecology, highly productive systems, land use, etc., etc.?
Thank you, Dick. Anke, you already see there's a bunch of questions and discussion. So later we'd like to open up the floors for our participant to ask questions directly. But then interesting also comment from, like to hear your response to Dick's question about what do you see are the achievement and challenges? Because the world of the food system is complex from the map, but you need to start somewhere. So this is a democratic effort in a way, but it's one of the tools to develop a scientific harmonization method for the industry. So I'm interested to know your opinion, what you're thinking. This is a project been going on for 10 years, I understand. What are the achievements and challenges and next steps ahead?
Well, first of all, I think that Dick, besides always having a great story, he also has a great visual. Because with the cross, you cannot have it all. And I cannot really answer the question, who should decide? Sorry, I can only refer to the work that we have been doing, and that is trying to combine it. Because as I've mentioned, the PEF methodology is including the FAO LEAP guidelines. It's including the science that is in place already on the whole LCA approach. with ISO certifications in place, with very well-known methodologies in place, with a lot of people who work in this field already. We also made sure within the GFLI that we have reviews done by experts. So that's how we try to combine our practical knowledge from a feed perspective with science, and also with very well-known bodies like the FAO. And according to how I see it, that's the way to move forward, because there's no one party who knows it all. We really do have to combine our approaches and our knowledge, I would say.
Thank you, Anke. I think we have a lot of questions from participants. I see I will first ask Gillian. As Quinn, you also raise your hand. So please switch on your microphone and then maybe explain your background and your question.
I wasn't sure which one to use, the hand or the chat. I get very excited when I hear you talk about standards and ISO certification. I work for the Dutch Standardization Institute, and we are the gateway in the Netherlands to European and ISO standardization. And I'm actually quite impressed with how much you at Cargill have been doing with a rather small network of partners. And then when I hear Dick's question on who should be right, who has the right to decide what the right methodology is, then I can only think about standardization being a neutral platform, providing a neutral platform that facilitates the process of comparing, validating, verification of certain different methods, and having all parties concerned involved in the development of one global language based on consensus. So this feels a bit like a standardization promotion talk, but it's just I think that platforms like that there are places already that exist where we play a very big role. And I'm actually curious more towards Anke. I know that Cargill is involved in standardization development, but not in the field of plant-based or how do you say that, protein transition, or in the feed sector. I only know Cargill from food safety and the cocoa, sustainable cocoa chain. But this is also a field where many experts from around the world are active already. And mainly, well, my personal focus is more on Europe, but can you tell me, well, maybe my question is, can you tell me something about the choice that you made to do this on your own, and not in like a broader platform with more stakeholders?
Well, this really does give me the opportunity, Gillian, to set something straight, I think. The initiative, so the idea for the GFLI has been born literally in a meeting that we had around the BEF feed. And the BEF approach, that's something that's being initiated by the European Committee. And there were several, and there are still several BEF projects, like for bottled water, for paper, for, well, all kinds of different. There's a BEF dairy, BEF red meat, a BEF feed. So there are a lot of different BEFs. And since we had to come up with databases where we based our calculations upon, and those databases were being bought by the European Committee and then made freely available. However, with so much information from the European Committee, you really got to know where to find it. And that's why we said, well, we can do a better job and make sure that people can also really find this information also from outside Europe. And then we were brainstorming a bit, and then the idea was born that actually it would be so much stronger if we could make this a global initiative. Since we knew that this type of work is being initiated by Europe mainly. More and more regions are picking up now. And it's much better if you have US crops, for example, also information coming up by US parties instead of us from Europe determining what the impact from US crops are based upon information that is available. And the same counts for other regions as well. So that's where we decided to make this a non-profit organization to really attract also global partners and to take more stakeholders on board. And what we see is that the usage of our database is actually quite widespread already, and that it's picked up by food and retail companies as we intended it to be. If they want to run certain analysis, then that's something that can be done with the data that is there. And the pre-competitive part really comes from the fact that we didn't come up with the category rules. That's something the European Committee did. And that the FAO LEAP guidelines are really taken as a basis. And again, that's also something that we didn't come up with. So that's a very strong fundament where we build this database upon. And as I said, the organization has been born now 1.5 years ago, so we're still starting and trying to make it more widely available. And the very, very big benefit for us as Cargill is that we are operating worldwide. So there's it's great to have such a pre-competitive database available that we can use as a very good benchmark, because everybody in every region, different calculations, methodologies will take place. And that's all fine, but it's great to have one sort of golden standard and preventing all kind of different sustainability languages.
Would it be interesting then to take it a step further if you're there? I mean, if you think maybe in half a year, like we've got everything we want now, and it is indeed in the eyes of the organization, it's a golden standard. Would you be willing to take it to the international standardization community and propose it as the golden standard and actually then make it into a worldwide accepted ISO standard?
It is definitely a good idea, and I'm really happy that you bring it up. And it's something that I would like to invite you into our technical committee to propose this and help us, guide us on what would be needed to do so.
Thanks for the
great discussion.
I'll definitely get back to that. Thank you.
Gillian,
great.
now I have
new connection made.
Yeah, great.
Tiffany, would you allow me to ask a question?
Yes, please.
To Gillian. Gillian,
yes.
we need a basic taxonomy. That is this new universal language. But in the end, it doesn't solve two things. People tend to disagree on the yields of ecological approaches to farming in the field. There are huge differences of opinion. They cannot be decided by scientific debate because it depends very much on expert opinion. So actually, real intuitions, and people really have them. So there are real experts, hands-on experts, and there is no scientific knowledge there. So that is a debate that goes on. How can we solve that in a golden standard of basic notions? That's one question. The other question is, because what I brought up was natural capital. And natural capital actually is very limiting. We need to decide where the chips fall. Where are we going to solve that? Because that is a huge problem. It's a huge political problem. Some people will tell you, well, you can just stretch nature's interests a little bit more in favor of ours. Or we do the other thing. And that is a political discussion. how are we going to solve that? Because NGOs will always put it on the agenda and will always fight companies like Cargill, whereas they are setting golden standards. Yes, I agree. So those two questions, how to talk about this intuitive
intangibles,
approaches.
Yeah. Okay. So to start with the first question about the intangibles, the process of standardization in ISO is usually a multi-tier process. So you start with writing down everything that you already agree on. And that's a scientific basis. So you start with the technical stuff and you start with that basis. From there on, you can build on things where maybe you need a couple of years sometimes of discussions. But there's in my experience in the last 10 years, I found that like 90% of what you really want to achieve with standardization, you can do that within the first couple of years within a technical committee. Reaching consensus is difficult, but the ISO processes are there to help you find that consensus. And usually by exchanging knowledge with a lot more stakeholders than you would usually even find in your own network, with actually sitting in one room with Greenpeace and Veerman, the slaughterhouse in the Netherlands, they might as well speak Chinese at the beginning. They don't even understand each other. But when you get to know each other, you actually find that there's a lot more common ground. And you start to realize that the other person might have a point in what they're saying. So I think the goal in itself might not even be the little piece of paper that we publish at the end, but the entire process of bringing stakeholders together globally, and having them talk about these things that are more intuitively, helps them create a new vision on reality and to find common ground, and maybe to say, we cannot fit this in one standard. Maybe we need 3 parts to a standard, which help us in different types of situations. It can be very nuanced. I know of standard series that have 13 or 14 parts, all relevant to a slightly different area of the same sector. And also there are a lot of, how do you say that? Like there are a lot of guidelines that you can write down in standards that don't necessarily say one thing is better than the other, but it makes them comparable in numbers or in quality. So there's a great management system for chain of custody, mass balance, claims, things like that, where you can easily say throughout the supply chain, doesn't matter what the supply chain is, but if somebody claims whatever at the end, by using this ISO standard, you can trace back how that was calculated. And then it doesn't even really matter whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, what the outcome is or what the claim is, but just to have a common language and a common calculation model will help you have a more balanced view of the world. So I think in that sense, no, probably we won't all agree at the end. But having certain standards on the things that we do agree on and having some calculation models helping you compare different sides of the story, I think that's what ISO provides.
Gillian, can I
before I go to the next answer? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but the question in return. So haven't you been in contact with have you been in contact with the European Committee around these PEF methodology? Because this is exactly what they're trying to achieve with the product environmental category rules to create these standards, at least for Europe, to be able to compare apples to apples.
Yeah. So we have what the European Commission generally does is give a standardization request to the European standardization body, which is CEN, C-E-N, but that takes a lot of time. And what I hear today here from you is that they're actually is already a lot of work has been done. Methods have been developed. And then my answer would be not to wait for the European Commission to have their administration in order, because I seriously think that's going to take another 2 or 3 years before we actually get the standardization request from the European Commission. But already start in ISO, or that we also have. I will not bore you with the structures that we have, but you can work together between SEN and ISO to create European standards with international, global stakeholders as well. So that would be my call to action: is please don't wait for the European Commission to figure it out, because in the end, the European Commission is going to say to SEN, you have to bring all the people together. But if we now already know that we can bring the people together and we know who the stakeholders are, then I would seriously encourage you to just start and not wait for them to have their administration in order.
I think it's already a great topic for a follow-up session on this topic, how to bring these tools and matrices into European standards. And then also, because Europe do take a lead in developing this food safety and sustainability standard, and that bring in also global partners like China. For example, organic farming is getting very big. Also, consumers are demanding and paying for that. So that's a very interesting topic of what would be the roadmap of bringing tools, matrices to standard, to certifications. We have also, for example, Global Gap in the audience. That's also a very interesting party. So on that note, maybe we can show the result of last poll question of our audience response. Bianca? No, it's diverse. So every time if we ask the question, we get a very different answer. But we don't have answer for this question, because indeed it's a developing topic. So we'd like to also ask, maybe Gillian, do you still have an answer back on the second question, or I can ask another participant, our audience?
Well, I will make personal contact with Dick about the second question. I'll let you just. I'm kind of hijacking
we have
your.
A lot of questions, yeah. Maybe we'll also ask Roel Bosma, if you're still there. You can introduce yourself and also ask your question. Roel is not. Is Roel Bosma? You're still here? Roel, would you like to ask your question directly yourself?
The most interesting one is probably the goal of Cargill to reach 25% organic provision of their ingredients, the stuffs that go into the feed. Then how do they aim to reach that? It's very difficult to have farmers become organic farmer in general. So in Holland, we struggle to get from 3 to 3.5%. So how do you aim to get to 25% from your ingredients from organic farmers?
Well, thank you for the question, Roel. So first of all, let me make sure the 25% organic, it's not our goal. That's from the European Green Deal. And what I try to make the connection with is what is driving the change. And one of the parts that's driving change is the European Green Deal. And as part of the European Green Deal, we see that there has been a target called out, which is 25% organic by 2030. Okay. To be honest, I have no clue. I have no clue today.
Okay, yeah, so you just think
how that will be reached.
The European goal, and the European Commission has quite some money to back this up. So you only depend on the European money. You're not going to make standards for yourself.
No, this is something where we will follow legislation, and where we are very curious how this will lead to maybe a shift also in the livestock production. Because as we all know, we do need livestock to in our complete food system to help us with recycling or upgrading certain byproducts. So also from the organic farming, there will be byproducts available. So I'm just really curious how that will work out. And it's also to refer back to the points that Dick made, is within life cycle assessment, not everything is captured. The environmental impact, there are 16 environmental impact factors already, which are related to greenhouse gases, are related to nitrogen, ammonia, nitrates in the groundwater, phosphorus. But not everything is captured. So the whole food feed system, human inedible ratio, it's not taken into account yet. So the big idea behind the 25% organic is really around improving biodiversity within Europe.
Yeah, but I could imagine that Cargill is also producing food, that Cargill says, okay, we know that this is important for people, so we will produce only organic food in the future. And then Cargill will contribute.
Yes, that's a very good question. So what we will always do is try to make sure that we are prepared for the trends that will come, that we will have solutions that are needed. For example, antibiotic reduction. We have a lot of solutions in our nutritional portfolio already, and that counts for multiple areas. And when it comes to organic, there are a lot of limitations when it comes to organic feeding of animals. And for sure, there's a lot of knowledge and expertise needed to make sure that also the organic livestock is kept in a safe, healthy, and responsible way.
Actually, a question a little similar to Ruth's question, that they were talking about the establishing a gold standard. Indeed, the question is Cargill adopting this gold standard for your own business globally? Because indeed, you have operations all over the world, whether it's not reaching organic, but does this tool help you to predict or analyze the potential consumer trend, and then in comparing different type of production, would that shift your business decision basically? Do you use it as your own business tool?
Absolutely. We use it ourselves as a benchmark as well.
Okay, great to know. So that should be also adopted by more global players down the road.
Yes, and it is getting adopted already. For example, the Dutch dairy industry, they have this life cycle assessment or farm assessment tool. It's called the ANCA, Annual Nutrient Cycle Analysis Tool, for dairy farmers already in place. And for the feed part, they are making use of the GFLI database.
Great to know.
Yeah,
we also have
since 10 years ago, or even longer, there's a Greek enterprise in aquaculture who's doing LCA to make his business more efficient, making more money. So it's a support also, but there is some parallel with how expensive will you produce.
Yes.
And how much cost will you have. So there is, they use environmental analysis to improve their business, also to make more money. So I think Cargill has its own benefit indeed.
It's the best world, combining profit with sustainability, right? We have a question from Simona. I think Simona, right? Hetzberger. You had a number of questions. Are you still there?
I am.
Well, yeah. Would you like to ask your questions?
Yes. Well, Anke, I'm very impressed and I'm very interested in the presentation you gave. And you spoke specifically about the LCA of feed, although you mention now and then also food. Now, there are several commodities, of course, that don't sound like commodities, but still are commodities, like salmon, farmed salmon, or tilapia, or indeed dairy, or other, or rice, or other grains for human consumption. Now, my question is, are there also already movements towards a standardized LCA for these commodities. And I'm asking this because we have seen in one of your slides that transport is not adding so much to environmental pressure. And well, of course, globalization is discussed nowadays. So I'm curious about whether in other commodities and other food, especially food, contrary to feed, this also is the case, and where we can find the data.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for your compliments. And again, I would like to refer or to give the compliments to the organization, because it is really up to Foodlog to create this kind of platform. So I'm really grateful for that. Your question is a very valid question. I think that overall, for all kinds of businesses, it counts that people are looking for standardization. Because what we in the end all want is to prevent greenwashing. We can all come up with our own calculation method and say, well, we are the best, but that's not the point at all. And if you increase just a very small amount of a certain sector because they are front runners and they are doing the best, that doesn't mean that you will have a big impact. So what you actually want is that within a complete sector, you are raising the bar, because that does make a much bigger impact than just for a very small front runner part of a certain sector. So looking at dairy, and given my background that I've also worked 5 years at Friesland Campina, one of the biggest dairy co-ops here in the Netherlands, we have been very active in building a dairy sustainability framework, DSF. And that's a global initiative as well. I also know from the dairy sector that just as we have gone through a European PEF for feed, there's also a European PEF for the dairy sector. So there are a lot of initiatives in place when it comes to dairy, on dairy processors on a global scale, connecting and actually being one of the first to really, as a sector, connect on what is important, defining how a sustainability framework should look like, what should be taken into account. And that's something you can find as well. They have a very good website, Dairy Sustainability Framework. Looking at and the PEF, so European approach as well. Looking at aqua, I know there's a PEF for aqua started as well, and you specifically mentioned salmon, and it's just coincidental, but one of my first jobs was really connected to the salmon industry, and that was back in 2005, and they started feeling the pressure from the public opinion that the seas were being fished empty to feed the salmon. As you might know, back then, a salmon diet contained 82% of marine ingredients, as they called it. So that's fish meal, fish oil. And over the years, I think within 12 to 15 years, they brought it back to 20 to 22%. And that was with soy included. However, soy has a land use change factor and the fish ingredients didn't. So because of this single issue, it was really being pushed to change from high marine ingredients to low marine ingredients and replacing it with vegetable sources and then turning into another challenge. So what we see our colleagues doing within Aqua is really trying hard to improve the situation, to make sure that we know what we're doing. And all the salmon farmers, for example, agreed upon Proterra soy, to use Proterra soy. And there are much more initiatives from our own. We just launched See Further, which is a signature program where we also state that we want to reduce the impact with 30% by 2030. So there are, and I think that's a good thing. So you mentioned a couple of great sectors already. The dairy one is very united. the salmon industry is quite united when it comes to making big steps towards lowering the environmental impact. I hope it gives a little bit of an idea or answer.
If I may react, it's very easy, to talk in this where we have well-educated, mostly also technically educated people around us, but in general, in society, there are certain ideas like that transport of goods is awful and having a huge footprint. You've shown this slide that compared to other aspects of producing, transport is sometimes really very minor compared to other aspects. So have you any idea? It's very easy. We can talk for days and agree again, but society thinks otherwise. You've shown this slide about poultry, or was it Dick? Can't remember. But anyway, this poultry slide, we all know that animal welfare is on top and much higher. We also know that NGOs, especially animal welfare NGOs, start to look at carbon footprint as well. Well, they'll get quite a problem then, as far as I understand. So my explicit question is how to combat false ideas about what is sustainable and what isn't.
Yes, you've got the golden question.
I also like to, behind my background, Simona, you see that our next session is about storytelling. So relating to this topic, how do we convey to consumer the right information, the truthful information, and tell the right story for people who do not need to understand all the LCA databases, but still can trust the environmental benefit or impact they're seeing is correct. So that's stay tuned also for the next session.
Okay, I'll certainly participate in the next session then.
Or if I may, Tiffany, because I think we need to open this discussion. We need to have it out in public, in the media, because we will never agree. We need. It's about trust. That is, in a way, what Gillian was talking about as well, in these professional back rooms. We're talking in professional backrooms, as Simone is saying as well. But this is something you need to do in public. And we'll never agree either in public, but we'll accept that we differ. That is so important.
Thank you.
Yes. Great. Effort from the Akke, he's from TNO. Actually, he just leave a note on the chat room. I think very interesting to look into it. Unfortunately, he has to leave, but I hope we can join back on the next sessions. It'll be also interesting to understand. He's already working with the NN and Dutch government on standardization. Actually, we come to the exactly at the moment of our final, the wrapping up the session. I would like to ask anyone with a burning question. You can still raise your hand. If not, then, thank you very much for joining this session, and then for the great discussion. Thank you, Anke, for a very good explanation and also the case studies and the concept. So we will continue this theme and topic, and I hope to see you all back in 2 weeks.